Hey guys, today I'm talking about watering and specifically 5 of the most common mistakes most gardeners make when they're watering their garden. I'm going to show you how to recognize it, how to fix it, and how to prevent it from happening again. So today's video is all about watering, and it's some of the most simple mistakes that almost everyone makes, but it can destroy your garden overnight and you'll just have so many problems that you encounter by improper watering. So watering is extremely critical when it comes to growing a garden. Now, the squash plant that I planted in the springtime is a certain victim of overwatering, and overwatering is the biggest problem in the garden because everyone thinks that water is the quickest way to fix an issue. The reason this has been overwatered, we've had rain for nearly every day. So there's a few things you can do to help cut back on the overwatering issue if it's from rain. But if you're overwatering, there's absolutely some changes you need to make in your garden to stop yourself from killing whatever plants you're watering. Now I wanted to give you a close-up here of these squash leaves, and you can see this yellowing is absolutely a sign of overwatering. When you're overwatering, the leaves are going to turn yellow prematurely and they're going to drop. Also, you can have wilting, just a common wilting. So these right here look great, but these are starting to wilt. You see some wilting over there. But wilting is an issue even though the soil is wet, and I'll show you a couple of ways you can detect if your soil is wet. But if you have a foul-smelling soil, if you dig the plant up after it's dead and the soil itself smells foul, that could be a sign of root rot, and the roots themselves will be brown or mushy. Last, if you see algae or mold growing on the surface, that's another sign that you're overwatering. Let me show you a couple of steps on preventing overwatering here. So in its simplest way of saying it, watering, when you're overwatering, you're watering too frequently. You're watering every day. You're not allowing the soil to dry out. Also, it could be the soil itself. The soil is compacted and you don't have enough amendments in there. You need to add something to help with drainage, whether it's pine bark or some of the other amendments that help lighten up the soil. And I'll put a list on the screen right here of things that you can add to your soil that will help lighten it and allow drainage to happen better. So that's one thing to remember. It's extremely critical not to try to plant in compacted soil because it can retain water for many, many days, and then your plant ultimately dies because it just never drains and it literally suffocates. There's no oxygen making it to the plant. When it comes to overwatering, if you're growing in containers, then that's really easy to overwater, especially if you're using drip trays. The drip trays can cause the soil to never dry out. So I have drip trays on these strawberries, but if I start seeing any of those signs of yellowing of the leaves or wilting of the leaves, I would remove the drip trays and cut back on my water to allow the soil to drain properly. Another thing is you want to make sure that the container itself has a large enough drainage hole. Sometimes the drainage holes on the pots are not big, when they're ones that come from the factory. So if you're dealing with plastic, you can drill a couple of extra holes. If you're dealing with ceramic pots, you're going to have to get a very special type of drill bit to drill through it without cracking the pot itself. So I always say go with plastic or some of the new materials that they're making the pots out of, so you can add extra drainage holes just in case you do have a lot of rain or if you have a tendency to overwater. Now, these lunchbox red peppers have done extremely well, and one thing about all vegetables, all peppers, all plants in your garden, you need to make sure that if this starts showing up, the yellowing of the wilting of the leaves, you need to stop watering for several days and allow the soil to dry out. You don't want to continue the process. You have to give the plant a chance to revive, and it can revive pretty quickly if you do that fast enough. Another thing you need to do is you need to inspect the roots. You need to dig around the roots carefully without damaging them, and you want to inspect them. And if they're in a pot, it's a lot easier, but in this case, if they're in the raised bed, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. But you're looking for black or mushy roots. If that's the case, then you need to definitely take a chopstick, go around the plant, and hit the soil about 6 to 8 inches deep to allow oxygen to get to the root zone. So just remember, something as simple as a chopstick or anything similar of size, just do that all the way around the plant, probably anywhere from 15 to 20 times to allow oxygen to get to the roots and allow this drying out process to take place. Some of the water will evaporate from those small holes you've poked in the soil. Now, the cucumbers I planted this year have done quite well. I only planted 5 or 6 plants because there's only so many cucumbers you can eat in a week. But another thing you need to make sure is if you're planting in raised beds or containers, make sure you add those amendments I mentioned earlier. Sand, perlite, compost is just a few, and that will help with the drainage, help with the aeration of the soil, and keep your plants alive, and you won't have any of this issue of sudden wilting and yellowing of the leaves. So just make sure that you have done all the right things to your soil. Now I've got a video that I made in the past about how to make a custom soil. I'll put a link that in the description, in the link right up here above, so you can know how to save a lot of money on soil and you don't have to buy that high dollar soil that's questionable to begin with. So take a look at that video once you finish watching this, and you can see how to make your own custom soil. Now these eggplants, and there's only 4 of them in this raised bed, but they've produced innumerable eggplants this year. I can't even tell you how many it's been. It's well over 50. But one thing you need to do is you need to set your garden up on a watering schedule, but the schedule needs to be created by the plant and not yourself. You need to find out whether or not the soil is really dehydrated. So you can do that with something as simple as a moisture meter like this. It can give you pH, it can give you moisture content in the soil and also temperature of the soil. So I'll put a link to one of these down below in the description, along with all the other products I like to use. If you don't have a moisture meter, you can just stick your finger into the top 2 to 3 inches of the soil until you come down to the soil. Now if you've added mulch to the top of your soil, you need to get below that, because the mulch will naturally drain away the moisture. But once you get 2 to 3 inches into the soil, if it feels dry, it means it's time to water. So set this watering schedule up that the plant wants and not what you're convenient doing. You can purchase a automatic watering device that hooks up to your hose, so you keep this on the proper schedule. But remember, the plant needs to determine how often it's watered. Now next, let's talk about underwatering, and that's one of those things that often if we're too busy, we don't have time to do the proper watering. But just remember, there's a lot of symptoms and there's fixes also, and we can look at the causes. But if you see dry, wilted leaves that are kind of crispy around the edges, or you see leaves just suddenly dropping, it could mean that you're underwatering. So again, watering, letting the plant setting its own schedule is critical. So another way of telling if you're underwatering is stunted growth. A plant that should be 3 to 4 feet tall in about a month, you see it and it's just barely over a foot. That's stunted growth, and it's probably because you're underwatering. So just remember, the bone dry soil is a really good indicator, and sometimes we can have a hard time determining how deep the moisture is. So that's why a moisture meter like this, you can go quite a bit deeper, 10, 11 inches deep, so you can find exactly where the moisture is around the plant, and you can get a better idea of how often to water. So something like this, the finger test is great, but having a moisture meter gives you a much more accurate understanding of what's happening below the soil surface without having to dig the plant up. Now this next trick on telling how dry the soil is the soil is pulling away from the edges of containers. Whether you're in a raised bed or a pot like this, if you see a gap around the edges and the soil is pulled back, yes, it is absolutely underwatered. The soil is dehydrated and it's kind of pulling together like this, and it just doesn't have enough moisture in it. That's a sign when you see that little gap in whatever container or raised bed that you're not watering enough. So just remember that the soil will tell you sometimes if it's being underwatered. Now wilting is another sign, but it's a specific timing of wilting. You might get up and you might see the plant early in the morning, it looks great, you go to work, you come home, and it looks okay, but it's in the hot time of the day when the sun is at its maximum heat, that's when you'll see a lot of wilting. So it may kind of revive itself in the evening, but you may not be seeing it in the middle of the day because you're not at home. So if you see wilting in the hottest time of the day, that's a sign that the soil definitely does not have enough water in it. So there's a type of soil that's hydrophobic, and that's one that contains high levels of peat. It can actually repel water. If that's the case and you have a lot of peat in your soil, or you've added peat to your soil, then you need to make sure that you add another additive to it. If you can't change it quickly, is adding some of these watering crystals. They will absorb water very quickly, and they start out as a small, it looks like just little tiny pieces of sugar, but once they absorb that water, they can grow to 500 times their size, and the root system of the plant can grow into those crystals and absorb water. So this will definitely help if you have a peat-based soil, and I would recommend using these in any case where you have a lot of problems with your soil retaining moisture. So when we're watering our plants, we want to make sure we do a deep watering so the water can get far down into the soil. If you're only doing just a quick surface watering or just a quick overspray, even though you've watered your entire garden, it may be an issue because the water may have landed, a lot of it landed on the leaves and it's going to be evaporated anyways, and the soil did not get much water at all. So when you're watering, make sure you water it right at the base of the plant and do like a 10 to 15 second count in a light shower spray if you're watering from a hose pipe, or if you're using a can, just make sure you're doing what I call a 15 seconds watering, where you count in your head to make sure that the plant, the root ball, is getting plenty of water. So doing that count will definitely help Make sure that each plant is getting the right amount of water. Now there's a trick to rehydrating your soil using Castile soap. You can take 1/4 of a teaspoon and add it to each gallon and then water it directly. You can use a can like this, or you can use a hose and sprayer. And if you have a water catch system and you can use lukewarm water, that's even better. Our tap water coming from underground is going to be a little bit on the cold side. So if you set up your own rainwater catchment system, you can kind of regulate the temperature by having it a little bit partially into the sunlight so the water is a little bit lukewarm. That really is good for the plants, just having a slight bit of warmth to the water. Not hot, but just like I said, just a little bit on the lukewarm side will definitely help your soil become less repelling of the water. It will be better at absorbing it. And of course the Castile soap, a lot of people don't know about it. It's one of the safest soaps you can use. So I'll put a link to that as well. And you can read about Castile soap quite in depth online. It's one of the best ones to use in the garden. Now, if you're growing your plants in containers, like let's say on a patio or a back porch area, that's one of the best opportunities. If you can pick the plants up and buy a small plastic tub like this, you can do what's called bottom watering. You can set the plant inside of a container like this for about 2 to 3 minutes and allow the plant to be watered from underneath it. It's called bottom watering. So any type of container, plastic, depending on your pot size, you can just pick your pot up, set it in there, and just give it that amount of time to absorb the water. It's probably one of the best ways you can imagine in watering your plant. In the bonsai world, that's a great way to water your bonsai, is to do bottom water, where basically you just set the bonsai tree inside of a container like this. Now, obviously this isn't possible if you're growing in ground or in raised beds, but if you're growing in pots, it's a great opportunity to water extremely thoroughly by using a container, and you can just lift it up and set it into that container. So evaporation can be a huge problem in the garden, and not having mulch on the soil surface can cause a problem with plants being underwater, specifically your vegetables. They need a lot of moisture. Like I said, not too much because we need our tester, but making sure the soil is not dehydrating. And one way to prevent evaporation is by putting a 2 to 3 inch layer of finely shredded pine bark. I don't really care for pine straws or regular straws because it still allows a lot of evaporation to take place. So adding this type of pine bark, you can find it at Lowe's, and it's in the bag called soil conditioner. I haven't been able to find it anywhere else, but sometimes you can find it at wood processing centers that go through a lot of trees. So extremely small pine bark will help prevent the evaporation from happening in your vegetable garden. Now, there's a couple of natural conditions that can cause us to underwater, and we're not really aware of this, but sometimes when a heat wave comes through, obviously your garden is going to need more moisture. If you're in an area that gets a lot of windy conditions, that can be another thing that can dehydrate your garden very quickly, especially if you're gardening on a hillside and it gets a lot of wind. So just remember that natural conditions can cause us to underwater when we're doing our schedule exactly as we normally would. And that goes back to testing the soil and also setting up something like this, a faucet digital timer, if you don't have a dedicated irrigation system. So as I said earlier, I'll put links to everything in the description, but you just want to make sure that you adjust your watering schedule based on what's happening in the world around your garden. So the third biggest mistake we make in our garden is watering at the wrong time of day. And some of the symptoms are you see mildew or rot, you see crispy leaf tips or wilting of the leaves or even curling of the leaves. So that's a symptom of something you're doing wrong when it comes to watering, and we're going to go through each one of those and how to fix that issue. Now, watering late at night can be another issue. If you're watering after you get home from work, that can cause a problem because water can stay in the soil too long and it could stay on the plants themselves, causing a variety of diseases. So the best and the most optimum time to water is between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. And if you're like me, you're very busy, you have to get out of the house in the morning, having one of those little irrigation systems that you hook up to your hose pipe can be a huge lifesaver for your garden because you don't have to worry about it. You can go on to work and let the timer do what it needs to do for your garden. Now, I often find myself doing this, and it's the second best time to water because I just don't have time to give those heavy waterings in the morning because I'm in a hurry to get out. But watering just before sunset, about 1 to 1.5 hours after the sun's kind of went over the horizon, the heat's kind of came down a little bit in your garden. Watering in that time frame is great because you know there's still going to be time for the plant to dry out and diseases won't form as quickly. So just remember, the second best time is just before sunset. So the prevention methods, let me just go over that again, is using things like timers, soaker hoses, and making sure that you're timing the proper watering in the morning, 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. is going to be your best bet to prevent all the issues that can come up, and your plants will be much better off by doing that. If you're getting a lot of rain, like we have, just almost daily rain, you can take black plastic and put around the base of the plant about 1 to 1.5 foot around the base of it, cut it in a circle, and then cut out a little slip so you can put it in there. And then you can take that out whenever the rain stops. We've had nothing but nonstop rain, and a lot of it has taken place late evening and then even overnight. So I've noticed a lot of problems popping up in the garden because of the issue with overnight watering and diseases popping up. Now, the fourth biggest problem we make when we're watering is we're not watering the root system, we're watering all of the leaves, and it kind of just goes against our natural intuition, is just watering right at the ground level. We want to water the entire plant, but avoiding the leaves is really important to prevent fungal diseases from starting. So always watering right at the base of the plant. Also, is if you have this rain that's occurring over and over like it is in my garden, you can take 1 teaspoon of hydrogen peroxide, put it in 1 gallon of water, and if you're seeing those yellowing of leaves, browning of leaves, leaf drop, you can kind of prevent that from happening by using a watering can or even a hose-in sprayer. You'll have to adjust it because this is an 6-gallon hose-in sprayer. So like I said, about 1 teaspoon to the gallon, and just overspraying your garden on the leaves if you're having a lot of diseases from the watering issue. Now, another issue when you're just watering the leaves and allow it to drip down to the plant is you can have poor root development. So that's a very common thing. A lot of people don't understand why their plant is not doing well when they're watering it each and every day, but it's because you're watering the leaves and not the root system. So just remember, poor root development is another symptom of improper watering. Now, when I first started my garden, I didn't have raised beds, I didn't have an irrigation system. I had the old-fashioned sprinkler like this, and I imagine a lot of people are still watering their garden like this, is they're using this type of lawn sprinkler, but it's one of the worst things you can use on a vegetable garden. Another thing, when I set my garden up, I had the sprayers like that, and they would go all over the garden. I thought I had the perfect situation going, but again, all these problems arose because I was getting the leaves wet and not getting enough moisture at the root base. So the fix is pretty simple to avoiding watering leaves. You can use watering cans with extra long spouts. You can use drip irrigation. And what I use now in my vegetable garden is micro irrigation, where it's adjustable. And I just ordered another set of those for some plants I planted in the front yard area. So micro irrigation for me is the best option because I can actually adjust each one of those little small emitters perfectly. Again, I'm putting links in the description to all these problems I'm talking about. Again, my favorite is the micro irrigation, not necessarily the drip hose, because I think the drip hose just kind of covers a much larger area. So you can pinpoint with micro irrigation the exact root ball or at the base of each plant that you're wanting to make sure it gets the right amount of water. Now, if you see this problem has started to arise in your vegetable garden, you're seeing yellowing leaves, you know there's a disease starting there. So removing the yellow leaves before it has a chance to spread to the rest of the plant, that's an incredibly effective way to prevent those diseases if you've done improper watering, is just doing a little surgery on your plant. Another thing seems a little extreme, but having a oscillating fan on a stand that's a little bit on the tall side, you can have it on a timer, and in the hottest time of the day you can have the air circulating, especially if you're in a high humidity area like me where diseases are very common. So you adjust your watering and then do some of those tricks like doing a little surgery on your plant or allowing more airflow. Another thing is, if you don't have electricity in your garden or close to the garden, you can also make sure that you space the plants far enough apart so you have proper airflow between each plant. So just a few takeaways from that particular issue that we have in the garden is watering right at the base of the plant, applying mulch, and don't water in the evening when you can have diseases forming on the plant. Make sure you do that. Early morning is the optimum time, 5 to 9. So the last and a very common thing in the garden is the flood and drought cycle, which is basically saying you're inconsistent watering. And so that's another thing that in the garden we need to be consistent. We need to have either irrigation timers, or if we need to have a schedule for ourselves after we've tested the soil with our very common little device here or our finger, we've discovered that the plant does need water. Make sure you're doing this consistently. So if you work a full-time job, an irrigation timer can be the salvation of your garden. So the flood and drought way of watering can cause a lot of issues in the garden, and especially in tomatoes and some other fruits as well, as you can have the cracking of your fruit. If you've ever seen the cracks forming on your tomatoes, it's usually because you're inconsistent watering. So I'll put a picture right here of cracked tomatoes. It's a very common thing. If you've ever grown them before, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, in addition to a problem with calcium in the soil, inconsistent watering or flood and drought type of watering, another thing it can cause is blossom end rot. So a lot of times if our soil is really high quality soil, but we're still having a problem with the bottom part of our either tomato, squash, or peppers, having that problem with blossom end rot. And I'll put a picture right here of what blossom end rot looks like. If you're having that issue, it could be not that your soil is lacking calcium, is that you're inconsistent watering. Now, the flood and drought type of watering can also cause another problem. You could have overall wilting of the plant, then recovering, and then quickly wilting again. So that inconsistent watering can cause that issue as well. So there's another couple of issues that flood and drought type of watering can cause. You can have leaf curl, or you can have dropping of the flowers before they have a chance to become fruit. Now, when it comes to leaf curl, there's a couple of issues that may be happening. Possibly the sun is so intense that the plant is kind of curling its leaves to protect itself from the intense sunlight. But if you're not having an intense sunlight, not in the middle of summer, July or August, it could be from inconsistent watering is the reason it's doing that. So the simplest way to correct the fifth biggest problem in watering is to create consistently. Now, you can use your smartphone to set reminders on watering more frequently. You can have an irrigation timer. You can test with a moisture meter to make sure that you're watering properly, but making sure that you're on a schedule with your garden. I know it's hard to do this, especially when you have an extremely busy schedule and a busy life, but consistency with plants is extremely important because they're unforgiving once they've reached the point of no return. Now, there's a few things you can do to prevent the flood and drought cycle. If you're really busy and you're away from home during the day working or away from your garden, you can have different monitoring systems. Just an old-fashioned rain gauge can tell you if you've had rain during the day when you weren't there. It's very common to be at work on one side of town and your garden is on the other and you're just getting a drenching rain and you haven't seen a drop all day. But if you have a dedicated irrigation system, I have a Rainbird system and also have a few areas of the garden where I have Orbit systems put in place. But these are rain sensors and they're automatic shutoffs for the garden. If you have a lot of rain, it will shut off and you can determine how long it will shut off for. So just make sure that if you are doing that with the more technological way of watering your garden, make sure you add a rain sensor to your system to make sure that it's not overwatering, because it's a very easy thing to do is forget that your garden is being watered whatever frequency you set it on and not having a rain gauge that will stop automatic shutoff. But I think the rain gauge method for the average gardener, they can just kind of take an idea, come home from work, take a look at their rain gauge and find out if they've had rain that day, and then they can adjust their watering schedule. But it all really goes back to this right here, either doing it manually with your finger and seeing if the soil is wet or using something like this. And I personally think this works best because you can get a better idea at different depths of how much moisture is in the soil. So success in the garden really does come down to proper watering. I think that in the past, I've used different watering methods. I've watered in correctly. So I just wanted to pass on what I've learned about getting your plants to produce as much as possible. This is just a fraction of what the garden has produced this year. I would say it would fill up this table and fall off the edges, but it just produces each week by proper watering. So guys, if you have a question about this video or any previous video, I hope you'll become a public subscriber first. And because I put those people to the front of the line. I get 100 to 300 questions a day and it's nearly impossible for me to answer them all. So I always try to give priority to anybody who has did me the great favor of becoming a public subscriber. Guys, have a great day.